Before we look at Black Mirror in a bit more detail, can we talk about what was happening to you before Black Mirror? Mm-hmm. What was the thing that you were most proud of that you did before you got onto Black Mirror?
Well, I've sort of done lots of weird. I've done lots of different things. So, like, my first job, I was a cartoonist, and that was quite good fun. And then I was a video. I worked in. I worked in Computer Exchange, which became CEX. I did the logo for CEX, which is still used.
You designed
to this day. That's a fun fact. I was paid £1,000, and I thought, this is a fortune. And then they became this global fucking thing. And then so probably I did a website called TV Go Home. I was very proud of that at the time because it meant that I was actually doing something, because I spent most of my 20s bitter that I wasn't writing for TV, because I wanted to write TV comedy and I couldn't see a way in. I wasn't like an Oxbridge person, so I was bitter and angry about that. And I couldn't. I'd watch comedy shows on TV, and if they were good, and if they were bad, I was furious, because like, how come this shit gets on the air? And if they were great, I was even more furious, because it's like, I could never do that. And I couldn't sort of see a way in, and then but I was doing a website, and a friend of mine suggested I did this one thing. He said, if you just do it regularly, the people might want to read that. And so I sort of actually kept at something for possibly the first time in my life. I was doing this little fortnightly thing, and it became a little culty thing, and that's what led to me getting a job at The Guardian. It led to me getting my job like writing on TV shows. So it sort of opened the door to me. So in a way, actually bothering to do a small thing every fortnight was probably my proudest achievement.
And do you think that...
Oh, Touch of Cloth, yeah. I should say. Did a show called Touch of Cloth, which was like a bit like Airplane or Naked Gun. And it's kind of overlooked, and it was like possibly the most mainstream thing I've ever done. But that was 2010, I think, 2011.
And I think you said you spent a lot of your 20s watching TV, and in one case you actually tipped the TV onto its side so you could watch it in bed.
Yeah, it's a tip, lifestyle tip. You can't, I mean, I think this was in the days of when TVs were like, it was like a portable CRT 14-inch TV. You couldn't do that with a great big... These days, they're the size of a fucking wall, though, aren't they? And why don't they have a mode? Why don't they just have like depressed mode, where you can just like press a button and it's sideways, so you can just... Because it's really annoying, isn't it? Or when you're on a sofa and you're sort of like this, and it's like, watching something subtitled. It's like, why can't TVs just have a sort of rotational...
To just spin it around?
Yeah, I don't mean the whole set, I just mean the image. It would be so easy. They won't do that yet. They will do that fucking mode that makes everything look like a soap opera with all the fucking fields removed by default. I got quite angry about that, didn't I? Angry about that. Field remove, whatever it's called. Motion smoothing. Fucking bastards.
Motion smoothing.
Yeah.
But do you think, looking back, that actually all those hours watching TV, it's actually quite important, actually quite formative?
Yes, I do. And I think that I was sort of trying my hand at things. I found my sort of comic voice in a way when I was doing video game reviews, for instance. So I didn't know that at the time you're doing these things that I was sort of like, I want to be doing something else, but actually you're putting lots of practice in. And I was absorbing lots of TV and watching it, and I must have been analysing it on some level as it was going in and depressing or enraging me. So I think, yes. Well, certainly even like when I was doing... So Black Mirror started at the very first episode, the national anthem, which is the one about the Prime Minister and the pig. That episode is actually a parody of 24 with Kiefer Sutherland. That's sort of how it started out in my head. In fact, the Black Mirror titles are almost a parody of the titles for 24. You're too young to remember the titles for 24. It was just like a sort of wearing that digital thing. If you watch them side by side, I'd probably open myself up to a lawsuit. But and so sometimes I'm channeling something almost in a sarcastic way, and sometimes I'm just learning from what I've seen.
And are you always conscious of the references?
Not all the time. It's interesting sometimes when you find that like I was right. Without giving anything away. So one thing, just watched The Bear, and then I started writing an episode for the new season, and there was like loads of sort of there's people working on chocolate, and I was describing like they're smearing chocolate all over it, they're chopping it up. Like I was just describing the sort of fetishized sort of like food shots they do in that. So sometimes things go in, and you go, why am I writing? Oh, it's just because I've just seen that. I'm hungry. And then other times you're sort of channeling, you're definitely trying to channel the tone of something, or something's gone in and then it has to come out. But there's definite times when we've done episodes which are almost direct homages to existing things. We did an episode called USS Callister, which is like a Star Trek sort of homage stroke spoof. We've done a sequel to that actually for the season. For this season coming up, there's a
with Jesse,
sequel to it. With Kristen Milioti. Right. Jesse Plemons is dead in it. Robert Daly died, so we've got the rest of the crew. But we've got Jesse Plemons himself is dead. His character, okay. Robert Daly, is dead. That's what just to clear that one up. Yes, and that's channeling. There's a very specific episode of The Twilight Zone that I watched, which was about a 9-year-old boy who's got sort of super powers, and it's a kind of actually a great study of tyrants generally, and it's terrifying still to this day. If you watch that episode of The Twilight Zone, it must have been done 70 years ago. It's still absolutely terrifying. It's called It's a Good Life. Look it up.
And do you have you made shows, either Black Mirror shows or otherwise, which have at their kind of their central reference point a video game?
Oh yeah. So one of the most popular ones that we've done. Well, we did one called San Junipero, which is a sort of love story set in a virtual 1980s, and I was channeling two. One is it came out of a slightly different idea I was trying to do. That was about somebody trying to find if there was an afterlife by connecting to people's brains as they died. So I was trying to do a horror story, and then that sort of morphed somehow into this thing about a kind of therapeutic virtual youth space for old people. And I thought about the 1980s, and I was thinking about Grand Theft Auto Vice City, which is an open world game set in the 80s. And so quite often I'm channeling something like that. Again, we've got, in the season coming up, we've got something that's very explicitly about video games. We also did one called Striking Vipers, which was about two guys who go into a sort of Street Fighter Tekken style game and start having sex with each other. And that came about because in the 90s I used to play a lot of Tekken, and I was playing it with my friends, and we'd be sitting there going, you bastard, come on, and then I realised the neighbours think we're just at it hammer and tongs in here. And that struck me as a funny thought, and that became a jumping off point. So quite often.
I think it's right in saying that you wrote a dissertation on Sonic the Hedgehog.
Yeah, it's stupid. That's why I never got my degree. I did a degree in media studies, and I wrote a dissertation about video games. It was terrible.
It would have worked now, though. I was evidently a visionary who was ahead of his time. I'd love to say that, but actually it was terrible. It was mainly about Sonic the Hedgehog and Road Rash on the Mega Drive. If you were on Desert Island Discs...
Which I was.
But it was... Sorry.
If I was.
But if you were. And it was called Desert Island Cartridges.
Okay.
And you could save one video game from the waves.
Doom. If there was one, it would be Doom. Maybe Tetris, because that's a sort of clap. Maybe Balatro, actually. But Doom was sort of the one that I thought that was, and it wasn't it wasn't ever physically available in shops. Yeah. It was shareware, so it was a good. So actually, it wouldn't actually fit your format, would it? It would be one. How would you store that? You wouldn't. It's in the cloud.
It just wouldn't work.
No.
Another question.
So I agree about Doom.
Good.
Nice.
A disclaimer, I work on AI policy, so this is a really... Sorry?
Oh, no, I said right.
Yes. So this is a really weird place to be right now. And I meant to ask you about your sources, because your series has proved to be really unnervingly on point at various kind of across the seasons. But then you told us that you don't consult scientists, so I'm going to let that drop.
Sorry.
So my question, I suppose, is I really find it fascinating how people relate to technology, and I'm just wondering what are your thoughts in relation to what is the most funny or interesting way about how people relate to technology?
I think there's interesting. I think a lot of it is what we. There's a strange thing that talking about social media. I think basically the thing about social media to me. I was being a little flippant when I said it's just full of bastards and whatever earlier on. It's kind of like being in a pub at closing time constantly. It's like people are on something. And so really I think we just need to learn to sort of factor that in. It's a bit like, oh, he's had a few drinks. Basically, it's kind of, so there's a sort of, there's the anonymizing factor of it, or the sort of the lack of instant human feedback definitely makes people a little looser in ways that are not helpful for society and civilization as a whole. I think not even a funny thing, it's like a thing that went in my head really early in the 90s. I had a phone, or maybe it was early 2000s. Had a phone it was in the times when you could only store a set number of numbers in a phone. You could only store like 100 phone numbers or something like that. And half of them were for fucking takeaways and things like that. No Deliveroo back then. And a friend of mine had died, and this was the first time I knew someone I knew had died. I'd heard been a former flatmate, and I'd heard he'd died. And I was like, obviously, like really sad. And then like 6 months later, something like that, I'm trying to put a new phone number in my phone, and I don't have room, so I have to make space to delete numbers. And I was going through the numbers, and I saw this number for this person I knew who had died, and I knew that I should delete it, but I couldn't bring myself to delete it because it felt like that felt disrespectful, and that felt cold, and that made me feel sad. And there was something about the way that this device, this thing that was impersonal, was causing a really deep sort of emotional feeling in me that I found sort of fascinating and sad. And so I'm sometimes trying to channel that, I think, through the series. When people have asked me what the episodes are about, when people say it's a warning or something like that, I don't see the show as a warning about where we'll end up. I think actually, I don't think about what the show is overall, but someone has pointed out to me before that most of the episodes are about what is real and what is reality. And I think that, again, that's what I'm trying to channel a lot of the time. That's a lot of the stuff I worry about. That's why I worry so much about misinformation and things like that. I think when you see those, have you seen the videos that, like, AI generated videos, and there's that one of like people riding like rodeo riders, or there's one of like archaeologists pulling plastic chairs out of the ground, and the physics is all wrong. So the plastic chairs are sort of flopping about, or people's limbs are sort of mixing into their face, and that's kind of funny and horrifying on some nightmarish animal level, where you sort of feel like that's making the amygdala light up like a fucking Christmas tree. When I look at that, on some level, that's like, it's like reality melting into this sort of Dali-esque hellscape. I worry about that. Did I answer the question, or did I just actually spiral off into a sort of monologue?
Did he?
Did I?
Yes? Okay, yes.
Yeah. But that's because somebody was saying that's why most video game engines are 99% physics. That's because they're understanding the physics, and AI video doesn't understand the physics yet.